I wanted to start this podcast this season because life can be chaotic, but you don't have to be. That's the main idea I want to get across. And so, how do you become a person who's not chaotic? It's resilience, and it's something that we can build. And so, I want to give you a warm welcome. My name is David Achata. I'm a leadership coach, I'm a consultant. And I have recently become a podcast host, and I created this podcast to try to bring people together. And so it's called How People Grow because we're all growing, we're all in transition, we're all learning. And I wanted to bring all of my worlds together to create good conversations. So this episode is the introductory episode for our season 2. And I'm thrilled to kick off this journey with you. And so I want to bring us back to this guiding principle. How do we become less chaotic? The answer is you work on yourself. I work with executives, I work with organizations, and everybody's trying to figure out how do you manage outcomes? How do you make deliverables? That's good. But the problem is you just can't sustain a life like that unless you're a steady person. So let's be honest, the way life goes is rarely according to our plans. You wake up every day, you make a plan, it hardly ever happens, and you get up the next day and you do it all over again. And so I have, just like you have, experienced unexpected twists and turns. There's all kinds of disruptions to my life and your life on a daily basis. So think about it. Here's some of the things that can happen. You lose your job, you get a difficult breakup, there's an unexpected health issue, there's global events, there's our crazy political drama right now. It's all this outside stuff. And the truth is, you just can't control it. So what can you do? You can control how you respond. And that's where the power of resilience comes into play. And so I want to just talk in this introductory episode about what is resilience? Why is it important? How do you grow resilience? And so I want to start here with what is it? Okay. So resilience isn't about being superhuman. It's about not experiencing any hardship, but it's about developing that inner capacity to adapt. Again, back to this idea of life is chaotic, but you don't have to be. So you develop this inner capacity to adapt when you're faced with adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, any kind of stress. So it's the ability not only to bounce back from these challenges, but also to learn from them and to grow stronger. The American Psychological Association is a leading authority in this field. They define resilience as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress, such as family and relationship problems, serious health problems, or workplace and financial stressors. So the point here is it's the ability to adapt when things are hard. So here's why it's important. Um, Without resilience, we've got this constant barrage of challenges that can truly overwhelm us. I was just speaking last night with a friend of mine from college who's doing well financially, but has really struggled with his marriage, struggled financially, and he's struggling with burnout. And he was telling me about some of his story. And so we got to talking about resilience and how do you get the right inputs into your life so that when things are hard, you can handle it. So remember, it's not about avoiding hardship. You just can't. But it's about equipping yourself with inner resources to navigate hardship effectively and emerge stronger on the other side. So, how do you grow resilience? I want to walk through three key, what I'm going to call investments. And these are, they're not personality traits, but these are actually skills. These are skills that you can practice regularly and invest in yourself. And so here's the three areas. The first one is you've got to learn to strengthen your inner circle. So that's a support system. The second is you've got to cultivate a resilient mindset. That's like a cognitive strategy. And the third is that you've got to prioritize physical and emotional well-being. That's self-care. So I want to go back here to strengthening your inner circle. So as human beings, we're social, and we live in this world right now where we're increasingly isolated. There's some fascinating research out there by John Capiaccio on loneliness. People who are lonely are inclined to die at a higher rate than people who smoke. So we're in this lonely world and it's not healthy for us. So we've got to learn to strengthen our inner circles. So who are your supportive relationships? Do you even have any? How's your relationship with your family? Do you have close friends, mentors? Um, all these people provide us with a vital sense of belonging. We get validation. We get practical assistance when times are difficult. I wrote about this in my book, Executive Retreats for Busy Business Leaders, about an ecosystem of wisdom, is what I called it. So you need counselors, you need coaches, spiritual director. I worked with spiritual director mentors, and of course, some of the other close relationships we talked about just a second ago. There was a study that was published in the 80s in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology by two guys by the last name of Cohen and Willis. And what this study found was that social support acts as a powerful buffer against stress. And so what happens is the social buffer, it reduces negative effects on both our mental and physical health. So investing in this inner circle, it's actively giving us these inputs that are nurturing our existence, our relationships, our loved ones, because we're a steady person. And so when we're steady, we can make this effort to build new connections. We can do it in a lot of ways, shared interests, activities. Um, but the point is, are you seeking out these relationships? Counselors, coaches, mentors, people who can offer you guidance and encouragement. So anyway, strengthen your social circle. The second one is learning to cultivate a resilient mindset. So this is the cognitive strategy one. There was a book years ago called The Happiness Advantage, and what they found was that a person's happiness was like 50% determined through DNA, 40% through mindset, and 10% through actual events. So even if you're a natural pessimist or realist, you can cultivate a resilient mindset. And so here's how it works. It's all about the thoughts that you tell yourself. You learn to pay attention to those thoughts and say, is this a helpful one? Is this helping me be present? Am I being amped up by thinking about the future, or am I being drained by thinking about past things I can't control? There was a German theologian named Meister Eckhart, and he called this psychological time. And it's when we think in the future or we live in the past, but we're not present. And if you're in the future or past, let me tell you, it will wear you out. I can tell you it's happened to me two times in my life, once when I was 37 and once when I was 44. And I had to learn to be present, and a lot of it had to do with mindset. And so the way that you learn to shift your mindset, it involves specific strategies, brain strategies that empower you to navigate challenges more effectively. So this includes learning to challenge your negative thought patterns. So what that means is to say, well, is that really true? Um, like objectively, is it true, or is it just the story I'm telling myself? Because if we can't learn to challenge our negative thought patterns, we get ourselves into this cycle of stress and anxiety. My wife and I learned this technique from Brene Brown where we talk to each other and we say, well, the story I'm telling myself is. So in other words, like I'm bringing this out of my head and into the open, and let's talk about it. There's also a form of therapy called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. It was pioneered by a guy named Aaron Beck, and it can be incredibly helpful in helping you identify and reframe these unhelpful thoughts. So it also involves practicing acceptance and recognizing that accepting what we can't change, it actually frees up our energy to focus on what we can control. So you got a hard thing going on in your world. Okay, what would it look like for you to accept it and just say, yeah, that's true. And it doesn't have to control me. So this is about cultivating realistic optimism. and learning to maintain a hopeful outlook while still acknowledging the reality of the situation. When you learn to do that, you can change what motivates you and it helps you persevere through those things. And I guess the last thing here in terms of mindset is it helps us learn to find meaning in our experiences as opposed to trying to control the outcomes. In our culture, we are so zoned in on controlling outcomes. But what if we said, okay, I can't control that, but there's something here for me to learn. There's a way here for me to grow. If you haven't read Viktor Frankl's book, it was called Man's Search for Meaning. He talks about his idea of logotherapy. And the whole idea is we can persevere anything if we've got a reason, we've got a meaning. And it's about his survival of the Nazi death camps. So it's really important to check that out. If you're trying to get out of your head, out of your outcome control focus, and get into this world of understanding, finding meaning for yourself. So the third area is learning to prioritize physical and emotional well-being. So if you want to become a more resilient person, you've got to take care of your body and your emotions. So our physical and emotional health, they're very, very connected. I've learned this the hard way when I've kind of coasted off the fumes of the muscles and my cardio of my youth. And I just kind of let it go. And I'd go out every so often for a run or a bike ride. But there were years where I didn't exercise regularly. And I can tell you my head wasn't in a good place. And what happened was that when I began to invest in my body, what I learned was that I was better emotionally regulated. I learned from reading that I was kind of changing the hormones in my body. I was reducing stress hormones and I was improving my mood just by exercising. And it didn't have to be epic. It's like a 15-minute run every day. It was pretty simple. Also, getting adequate sleep. I won't talk about this much in this season, but maybe in the future, in season three, we're going to talk about the wisdom of the body. But getting adequate sleep is essential because sleep deprivation actually can impair our cognitive functions and our emotional regulation, and it makes us more vulnerable to stress. And a big culprit that was disturbing my sleep was coffee. Um, there's a book I read called Stolen Focus, and he talks about how coffee is like putting a post-it note of your gas gauge in your in your car. So you're empty, but you're pleasantly driving along not knowing it because what caffeine does is it actually covers up the effect of your sleep receptors in your brain. So you're tired and you just don't know it. So people will be waking up in the middle of the night. They're not sleeping deeply. It's because in the middle of the night, your body's going through caffeine withdrawal. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying cut it out altogether. I'm saying I had to cut it out. And it's helped some of my clients also. So something to think about. It's a bigger conversation for another time. We'll get into that in our season three, probably. But the point here is that if you want to give an upgrade to your physical and emotional well-being, you got to sleep better. And so exercise is connected to that. The chemicals we're taking into our body, alcohol, caffeine, all that is connected. And so the other piece is learning to incorporate mindfulness and relaxation techniques. So like meditation, deep breathing, all this stuff can help us manage stress. And for me, I'm a Christian, though honestly, I'm reluctant these days to use that term. Christ followers probably more preferable. Christian seems to be kind of associated with this power structure right now, and I just, that makes me sad. Um, but as a Christ follower, I have learned the art of what's called centering prayer. And centering prayer is similar to mindfulness, and it's this idea of learning to be still with your breath and be with God and allow your thoughts to just drift by like a leaf on a river. You don't have to pay attention to those thoughts. Just sit there in the quiet for 10 minutes, 12, 15 minutes is all you need every day. Allow yourself to breathe deep, get in touch with your spirit, your calm. And if you're a believer in God, to Listen, like, is there something here? It may not be words, it may not be lessons, it may not be direction, it might just be presence, the presence of God. If you're not a Christian, or Christ follower, I should say, that's okay. Are you taking time to be still and incorporate mindfulness, which is very similar? Let those thoughts drift by. Get in touch with your sense of inner peace. So take care of your body, take care of your sleep. And last, in regards to the body, eat well. Eat well, put in good nutrients, and you'll be better both physically and mentally. So anyway, so those are the three ways that you can cultivate resilience. It's strengthening your inner circle, cultivating a resilient mindset, and prioritizing physical and emotional well-being. And there's some interesting science here I found, and it's about resilient brains and what they have that are different from everybody else's brains. So there was a study that came out in 2016 in a publication called Nature Neuroscience, and the gentleman who worked on that, his last name was McEwen, and his colleagues. I think it was a he. I apologize if it was a she, but I think it's a he. And what they did was they explored the brains of mice as related to chronic stress. So they would expose these mice to these stressors, and what they discovered was really interesting. They actually were able to see which mice were resilient. And they figured out who those mice were, which ones, and how they coped with the stress. And what they did is they studied their brains, was that their brains were utilizing more genes than the other mice that were non-resilient. And so the suggestion here from the finding is that resilient brains are actually more adaptable and capable of calling upon a wider range of resources to navigate the challenges. And again, how do you get that? It's all about the inputs. How are you nurturing your body, your emotional life, your brain, your relationships? Those are all making your brain stronger too. So, furthermore, what the research found was that um, brain chemistry that's often characterized by balanced and well-regulated neurotransmitters um, is more in character of a resilient brain. So emotional regulation, super important. Um, it's like how do we learn to understand the chemical input output of our bodies and brains? And so what they found was that a resilient brain has high levels of chemicals like serotonin. That's the close chemical. Um, Dopamine, that's the fun chemical. Oxytocin. And what they found was that those chemicals helped the brain offset the stress hormones like cortisol. And so what that indicated in their study was resilient brains had a greater capacity to adapt to stressful situations. In other words, to bounce back with effective emotion regulation. So how do you get healthy dopamine? How do you get healthy serotonin? It's relationships, it's good habits, it's good exercise, it's emotional regulation through mindfulness, or like I mentioned, centering prayer. But the reason it's important is that um, resilient brains actually showed increased activity in the prefrontal cortex. That's the brain's command center for decision making, but it's also the brain's command center for emotional regulation. And what they found was that when the prefrontal cortex was stronger, that the activity in the amygdala, which was fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, which is people pleasing, the amygdala brain region actually was calmer. So it doesn't mean your prefrontal cortex is the boss of everything. It means that it was really well developed. And how do you do that? It's taking care of your body. Van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, talks about how your body is like a second brain. So taking care of it is really essential. So anyway, done with all the science talk. I want to review a little bit these three pillars, then tell you what we have coming for season two. So these three pillars are connection, perspective, and regulation. So remember, strong social connection, super important. Perspective, how are you nurturing your brain and connection to your body through deep breathing, through exercise, and so on, so that you can effectively um, challenge the negative thoughts that are coming in sometimes. And the last one is regulation. It's about managing our emotions and our physical well-being through self-care. And when you can get a regular practice of self-care, um, what's going to happen in your family and in your organization is that they're going to say, oh, that's how it's done. So not only are you going to be happier, but the people that are around you are going to be happier as well. And so what we're going to do this season is I've got 6 episodes coming, and I want to tell you a little bit about these people. So we're going to hear from Mike Sinelli in episode 1. He's going to share his overcoming of heroin and talking about integrating practices. So he's going to illustrate the pillar of regulation. The second episode is with a woman named Brooke Lark, who I've recently met. She shares her deeply personal experience about leaving the Mormon church, all the ups and downs of her relationships after that, learning to find life outside the Mormon community, but also through her discovery of a community around plant medicine. And Brooke's story beautifully exemplifies the pillar of finding connection, the right kind of connections. And so the third one is going to be Vince Chamberlain, who is a former Coast Guard captain. He also happens to be my barber, and he's going to highlight some of his rocky journey after the Coast Guard to becoming a barber and what he's doing now to help veterans. And he's going to share, I think, the value of the pillar of perspective. We're going to hear from Amy Buckingham, who's a healthcare executive, a former client of mine. And what Amy talks about is she's going to share about her story of growing up on the Round Valley Indian Reservation in Northern California and her wild, wild life there and getting out of that environment and doing what she's doing today. And so she's going to talk about vulnerability and how we got to learn to lean in to become vulnerable, lean into others with vulnerability. So she's going to illustrate the power, I think, of connection. And then my good friend Justin Euler is going to be on the show. Justin is a former Army Ranger, and he's now a business consultant. And he's going to share about overcoming PTSD. And I think Justin is going to be a really good example about, illustrating for us the role of both connection and regulation in the healing process. So he's going to talk about that. And then last, the season finale is a new mentor friend of mine, Lisa Sharon Harper, who's an author. She's a professor and an activist. And she's going to share her profound journey to discovering her own story in her book called Fortune. And Fortune is the name of a descendant of hers. And so she's going to talk about how understanding our personal narrative is, in her words, the medicine we all need. We all have a story. We all need to learn. And she says that's medicine. She's going to talk about the formulation of the racial dynamics in our country, in the United States, and why it's important for us to understand the history. So anyway, so I'm excited for that conversation. So as we finish up, those are some of the inspiring stories that we're going to be having a conversation about. And I'm so excited that you're here. And we will be releasing new shows every week. And that's what's coming. Okay. Last bit here is our Patreon account. Got a little upgrade. If you go to patreon.com/howpeoplegrow, you'll see 2 ways to support. One way is $9 a month. That gets you a monthly Zoom conversation with me and others who are listening to the podcast who really want to grow in some of these areas. And the second one is a little more pricey. It's $199 a month. And what that gets you is a retreat with me. I figured I'd do this with my coaching clients. Why not do this for my Patreon supporters and listeners? So if you want to do that, go check it out. You also get quarterly coaching, plus you'll get to join that Patreon Zoom conversation as well. So it's a little bit more robust for the money that you get there. There's only 12 spots for that, so if you're interested, let me know. I'd love to have you as a supporter there. Thanks for checking us out. And episode number 1 is coming up soon. And check back for it. All right. See you soon.